Welcome to the Quotive Corner. Today's quote is a question. Just a question, not an answer, not a declaration, not a piece of advice. And it's one of those questions that the more honestly you try to answer it, the more it opens up beneath you. Are we what we do with time? Or are we what time does with us? That's Mahmoud Darwish, widely regarded as Palestine's national poet, one of the most celebrated voices in modern Arabic literature, and a man whose entire life was shaped by the intersection of time, displacement, and identity. Born in 1941 in the Palestinian village of Al-Birwa, he experienced the exile as a child when his village was destroyed in 1948. He spent decades living outside Palestine, in Egypt, the Soviet Union, Lebanon, France, returning only near the end of his life. He wrote the Palestinian Declaration of Independence in 1988. He won nearly every major international literary award available to him. And throughout all of it, he wrote poetry that treated questions of home, time, loss, and selfhood not as political abstractions, but as personal, lived, utterly human experience. He died in 2008 after heart surgery in Houston. He was 67. This quote appears in the Presence of Absence, his final prose poem collection, a self-eulogy written in the last years of his life, published in Arabic in 2006 and translated into English in 2011. It is, by any measure, one of the most extraordinary literary documents of the last half-century. A brief honest note. The quote comes from a translated work, and wording may vary slightly by edition, but its appearance in the book is well documented across multiple independent sources. Now, the question itself, Darwish doesn't answer it, and that's the most honest thing about it. He simply puts it in front of you and steps back, because it's a question that deserves pondering for a while before you reach for an answer, and the answer you reach for says something about how you've been living. Are we what we do with time? This is the active version of the self, the person defined by their choices, their agency, their application of will to the hours they've been given, the builder, the maker, the person who looks back on their days and can point to what they produced, what they shaped, what they decided. This is the self that most of modern culture celebrates, the self of intention, ambition, and deliberate construction. You are your choices. You are your habits. You are the accumulated output of what you decided to do with the time you had. There is real truth in this. In a previous episode, Sam Levinson told us to do what the clock does, to keep moving, to make forward motion the default rather than the exception. And in another episode, Jerzy Gregorek gave us the hard choice producing the easy life. We also talked about how James Clear built an entire philosophy of habits around the idea that your daily defaults are the truest measure of what you're becoming. All of them are making the case for the first half of Darwish's question. You are what you do with time. Or are we what time does with us? This is the other version, the self that is shaped, worn, marked, and transformed by the passage of time, not through agency, but through experience. The grief that arrived without invitation and changed something permanent. The loss that rearranged what mattered. The unexpected encounter that redirected an entire trajectory. The slow accumulation of lived experience that produces the kind of understanding you couldn't have planned for, couldn't have built deliberately, could only receive by going through enough of life to have it happen to you. This is the self of various people we talked about in prior episodes. It is of Aeschylus, wisdom coming alone through suffering, arriving not through effort, but through endurance. It's the self Dostoevsky was pointing toward when he described active love as labor and fortitude. Not something you manufacture, but something you are shaped by through sustained commitment. It's the self that Darwish himself embodied, a man whose identity was formed not primarily by what he chose, but by what was done to him, to his people, to his homeland, across decades he did not control. And here's what makes the question so precise. Both answers are true, and neither is complete on its own. The person who insists entirely on the first answer, we are what we do with time, risks a kind of hubris about human agency. It overstates the degree to which we author our own lives. Much of what shapes us arrives without our consent. The circumstances of our birth, the losses we didn't choose, the historical forces we were born into, the experiences that happened to us before we were old enough to decide how to meet them. The self that emerges from a life is not purely constructed, it is also received. The person who insists entirely on the second answer, we are what time does with us, risks a kind of passivity that excuses inaction. If we are primarily shaped by forces outside our control, then the choices we make carry less weight, the habits we build matter less, the directions we choose become less consequential. That is not true either. Agency is real. What you do with what happens to you is one of the most significant determinants of who you become. Darwish, of all people, knew both truths simultaneously. He lived them. He was shaped by displacement, exile, and loss that he did not choose, and he made something extraordinary with and from that shaping. His poetry was not the product of either pure agency or pure circumstance. It was the product of what a specific person, formed by specific experiences he did not control, chose to make with the time and the gifts and the wounds he had been given. That intersection between what we do with time and what time does with us is where the actual self lives, not on either side of Darwish's question, but in the tension between them. And the question is most useful not as a philosophical problem to resolve, but as a lens to hold against your own life. To ask honestly, which side of the balance you've been neglecting. Have you been so focused on what you're doing with time that you've forgotten to receive what it's offering? Or have you been so shaped by what has happened to you that you've stopped exercising the agency you actually have over what comes next? Those are very different problems, and they call for very different responses. Now let's consider an important counterpoint. The question, framed as an either/or, can also be a false binary. Most thoughtful people would say the answer is both, that we are simultaneously agents and recipients, shapers and shaped. The more interesting work is not choosing a side, but understanding the proportion in your own specific life, at your own specific moment. The question is most useful when it reveals an imbalance rather than when it prompts a philosophical verdict. Darwish was a poet. He asked questions that opened rather than closed. He built his life's work on the understanding that the most important things resist being answered cleanly, that they repay returning to, holding up to different lights, carrying with you across different seasons of life. This question is one of those things. Are we what we do with time, or are we what time does with us? Perhaps the most honest answer is we are the conversation between the two. Thanks for spending a few minutes here at the Quotive Corner. If this one made you think about which side of that conversation you've been living in, and whether the balance is what you'd want it to be, that's worth some genuine reflection. And reflect on this. Wisdom isn't in the quote, it's in the reflection. See you soon in the next one.